Hello everyone, I'm Jay Villar. I'm taking over for Hope as your gardening guru here at Newton Community Farm. And it's Wednesday, and today's topic is about cover cropping. So why is cover cropping so important? Well, the act and the art of cover cropping is really about maintaining good quality soil health for the longevity of your land. And what I like to highlight is that we're not just vegetable growers, we're soil growers. And the more diversity and the more healthy your soil is and maintains and can become, the better opportunity you have as a farmer, as a grower, and as a consumer to have, eat and possess high quality vegetables. So when you sort of think about your soil, you're really thinking about how do I best maintain the health and the diversity of that soil, whether it be here at New Community Farm or at home in my home garden. And today's main focus is going to be talking about the general practices and philosophies and guidelines around how to incorporate cover cropping in a local farming area. But next week's episode is going to be specifically designed for how do home gardeners use cover cropping in their practice and their hobby. So today, the main focus is going to be just around the guidelines and how to think about cover cropping as managing the health of your soil. So when we think about our soil, we sort of think about like our skin, right? So our skin likes obviously to be covered. Some have like hair on it, some sort of thicker than others. But if you have like a scratch on your skin, you're all of a sudden going to start to kind of grow new areas of skin on your body simply because it's going to be like exposed. So similar to how we think about our skin is how we need to think about the land and our soil. If we're growing something like on that soil, that means that the soil is getting something, it's getting nutrients, it's getting supplies of oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, or what's called NPK, in order for it to continue to build its own soil matter. But if we're not putting anything onto the soil, nature is going to do that for us, and that's where like weeds come in. So when like weeds come in, it's trying to protect that soil from at least just being exposed. So at least we know that something is alive there. But as producers, where we want to kind of grow something specifically, we want to make sure that the health of our soil is getting the nutrients that it specifically needs. So for example, on nitrogen. So nitrogen is a chemical compound that all plant matter needs in order for our vegetables and flowers and all the other things that grow out of the ground to have. So if your soil doesn't have nitrogen, it's very unlikely that anything is going to be really growing from it or anything that can grow from it. So you're always imagining, how do I add nitrogen into my soil? And as a organic grower, you're always trying to partner and think about, how do I use nature to then add nitrogen into my soil? Well, this is where cover crops come in. And certain cover crops will pull nitrogen out of the air and then put it into the roots of the plant and then add it into the soil. And then other cover crops will actually scavenge nitrogen that's already deeply rooted in the soil, and then bring that nitrogen back up into the top layer, so that when you do plant for your future crops, you're able to then use it more readily. So for example, This is clover. So I'll kind of give you an example of what clover seed looks like. And clover seed is a fixing nitrogen plant. So what clover is going to be doing is you take your soil and you plant clover on top of it, and then it's going to pull that nitrogen from the air, put it into the roots, and then establish that into your soil. So then you're adding nitrogen naturally through clover. Whereas winter rye, so here's some example of winter rye. So what winter rye does is, because rye roots go so much more deeper into the ground, it's scavenging any nitrogen that has been sort of trapped below the surface and able to pull that up to make it more readily available for plants that are not as shallowly planted, to be able to then use that nitrogen for their own purposes. So there's always this cyclical relationships that are occurring. So that's sort of like two major examples just on nitrogen alone. Another plant that is used for cover crops are oats. So oats are used in the spring. It's great if you do have animals that you're trying to also incorporate in your cover cropping. It's a great foraging cover crop, so the animals can then just eat that. It's really great for weed control. It's awesome for to make sure that the soil erosion isn't able to run off on your land, and it also softens the soil. So when you imagine your soil, you're imagining it to be this really great sort of kind of Play-Doh-ish kind of consistency that has just a lot of aeration in it. So that's what the oats are able to really hold on to. Whereas buckwheat, so buckwheat is really great for what's called breaking the disease cycle. So similar to how most organisms work, where if you're constantly being planted over and over again the same thing into your soil, you're more prone to the same diseases coming back, same pests coming back. And what you want is to put new nutrients into the soil and then replant something else so that you have a rotation that's going in. So buckwheat is able to kind of break that disease cycle if you plant it in the summertime, and then figure out what's going to go in after the buckwheat that's different than what that crop was before you planted the buckwheat. And then the next one are field peas. So field peas, these add nitrogen into the soil. They're great for weed suppression. They're a great soil enhancement. And depending on what your sort of plan is, some of the cover crops can also act as cash crops. So if you're, let's say, adding sort of peas to your hay, it's sort of a great way that you're able to then sort of harvest the cover crop and then add it to other things for either like feed. And that's another way that you can actually sell it, and it's not just going directly back into the soil if you're looking at that practice and that purpose. So again, depending on what you're thinking about for your planning in and around your cover crops, you are creating a plan depending on what your strategies are. And if you are looking to turn your beds and make it kind of go through the winter, there are a couple things that you're going to want to be able to do. One, you have to think about when your winter starts or when your frost state becomes in your region, and then giving your cover crops enough time to be planted so that the first frost doesn't kill it. Now, there are things like frost planting where the frost does come in, and planting things like clover, you're able to plant the clover, or sort of spread the clover on top of your field when you get that kind of crunchy sound. So if you ever kind of wake up in the morning and like the dew and the morning dew is like frozen overnight, and you like stomp on the ground, that's where you could actually start planting your clover, and that's called frost seeding. So speaking of seeding, we're going to kind of give you a example of kind of thinking about your planting, and when you're going to think about your planting, and how to look at your soil in a way where cover crops and cover cropping will make sense to you. So here at New Community Farm, it's just almost mid-September, and we still have a lot of our beds in production. So currently, right now, we're not putting any other cover crops in just at the moment, simply because we have things that are still in production and waiting for our fields to produce the harvest that we're going to be harvesting. So, here, for an example, we still have our chard and our kale growing. So, chard and kale, they constantly can be producing after just one planting. So over the course of the season, we've been harvesting a little bit, using it for ourselves, into our CSA, into our donations, into our farmers market, and then leaving it alone. So we're constantly sort of monitoring and managing the kale and chard, and then probably when the first frost comes, we're just going to remove all of the plant matter and then put some type of cover crop over it. Here next to it, we planted a bunch of lettuce greens. So everything here is seeded specifically for a new ground of lettuce. But imagine, if you will, that we didn't have anything here that was going to be in vegetable production. Like, this ground would then be ripe for some sort of cover crop, depending on what our strategy was. So as I mentioned, if we noticed that there was a lot of disease that was coming into this specific field, perhaps we would grow buckwheat just to get ahead of that and hopefully mitigate anything that we've been planting for in the past. If we wanted to, if we find that we've been lacking a lot of nitrogen, maybe we'll do some more clover or some oats. It would just really depend on kind of what our strategy is to which production would be most available. And then also, we would also potentially even do a cocktail of sorts of different cover crops to make sure that all the benefits that I highlighted could be concentrated in this field. So if we just left this field alone, nature would do her own course and simply just like add weeds, and that weed bank that's already in there will then either be more difficult for us to plant because the weeds are taking up more of the nutrients that we actually need out of it. So we're trying to add nature by adding all of the nutrients that they're looking for the plants that we want, versus trying to control in a way that the weeds that we're looking to remove aren't so abundant. And as I mentioned, the big thing with our cover crops is we're really looking to take care of our soil. So as we can see right now, the soil is quite dry, and it's pretty hot today. So there's there's not a lot of moisture happening in the soil, but thankfully our plants are planted in there so that when we do water, when we do grow something, things are going to be returned back into the soil. So we're gonna like slowly walk to another portion of the learning garden and have it be a working example, just to show everyone kind of what it looks like when you have certain aspects of soil erosion, and why it's so important to think about your cover crops in a way that manages what you're doing and what farmers are doing. So imagine, if you will, that this bed here of flowers and radishes and parsley is just the land. And our job as steward of the earth is to try to protect the land as best we possibly can, while using it in a holistic way for us to get the nutrients out of the food that we're looking to grow. So if we just took our water vase and pretend it was the rain, and the rain was coming down, like you would see lots of exposed water coming through, and all of the runoff and the puddles that the water is happening, right? So all the soil now is just sort of being like exposed, and the water really has kind of like nowhere to go, or it's simply like running off, and it's what it's doing, right? So when you imagine all of these like barren fields that are just exposed with their soil, and the rain's coming through, that runoff of pesticides, of herbicides, like all of that is eventually going into our water supply, and then into us. So what we're trying to do is not only protect the soil, but also give it a place to go. So when we grow certain plants or vegetables, in this case like flowers, we're able to then kind of absorb the water in different ways. And you see that in the case of the flowers here, the plant matter is going to be absorbing as much of the water as it possibly can, and the runoff is going to be less. So that's just a great way of doing it as well. And then this is parsley, so this is not a cover crop per se, but when cover crops are kind of doing their thing, like they definitely have as much lineage on height as these do. And all the water does is it hits the soil, obviously, but the plant matter or the cover crops are able to soak it up, and there's not as much or if any runoff as it possibly could make. So helping again kind of really protect the soil and give that water kind of a place to go, helps complete that closed loop cycle that nature and rain and our plants all have sort of like in stored, and then we get to use it in a very hopefully holistic and natural and organic way to eat the right vegetables for us. So cover cropping, it's obviously it's very nuanced depending on what your goals are, but it's extremely important for farmers and for farms to have a plan, have a system about which cover crops they're about to use for their own vegetable production. So healthy soil, healthy plants, and healthy people equals also a healthy us. So thanks for watching us here at Newton Community Farm. Once again, I'm Jay Villar, and I'll be back next week specifically to talk to you about what's happening in your home garden around cover crops and how to create a plan for yourself. Take care.